All right, so in this video, we are going to be reviewing on how to convert between fractions, decimals, and percents. All right, so first things first, we are going to have to review what in the world is a decimal, right? So a decimal number is using a number that has a decimal point. So you have a decimal point followed by digits, and the digits to the right of that decimal point are going to denote values that are smaller than 1. So pretty much we see these numbers when we're talking about money, right? And then the cents are on the right side of the decimal. And we all know that cents are part of a dollar, right? So that's where decimals come into play. Now, a percent is when you have a part of a whole, and we normally express it in hundreds, right? So for example, your grades, we always express it as a percent. So you have a 92% average, and we know it's out of 100 possible. So that's the difference between a decimal and a percent. Okay, so it is going to be important that you do know about place value when we're talking about decimals. Sometimes your problems are going to tell you round to the nearest hundredth or to the nearest tenth. So you are going to have to know where exactly the place value is taking place. So when we have a decimal, we're going to go 4 place values to the right. And I'm going to tell you the name so you're used to hearing them and to writing them down. So when you have a decimal, you might have, I just put a 0, right? But you could have any number on the left side. But right to the right of the decimal, your first place value is what we call the tenths place. Again, I know to the left of the decimal, you have the ones, tenths, hundreds. But when you go to the right, you always start at tenths. So we have the tenths, and then after that, we have the hundreds. And I'm pretty sure you guys know the pattern already. Then we have the thousands and the 10,000s. And we could keep on going forever, but the video would take forever. So I'm just going to stop here. We have our tenths, the hundreds, the thousands, and then the 10,000s. So if for some reason one of your questions asks you round to the nearest hundredths, now you know that that's 2 decimal place values after the decimal, right? So make sure you have this handy when you have a rounding problem. Now here we go to the good stuff, right? So here we are going to be practicing how to convert a decimal to a percent. When you have a decimal, for example, the 4 decimals we have on the bottom, there's 2 ways of doing this, and you could do it whatever way you prefer. So one of the ways we do it, and might be probably the easiest one, when you have a decimal to a percent, you're going to move the decimal point twice to the right. You have to make sure that you remember that. So you have a decimal that you're trying to make bigger. And since it becomes a percent, you do have to add the percent sign to it. So just be ready. If for some reason you're moving the decimal place twice to the right and you run out of spaces, those empty spaces, you're going to fill them up with a 0. Okay, so just remember that. When you have a decimal 2%, you move twice to the right. Some people prefer to do it like that. Other people just prefer to not worry about the rule, and they simply just multiply by 100. Those 2 things are exactly the same thing. So whichever one you prefer, go ahead and do that. Just make sure that at the end you do add the percent sign. So we're going to go ahead and give this a try real quick. Here for the first problem, we have a decimal and they're asking us to move it to make it into a percent, and they are asking us to round. So what we're going to do, I'm going to go ahead and do it using the first method. This decimal place, since it's a decimal, you're going to have to move it twice to the right, and then it ends up here. And then, of course, we add a percent sign, and that would be our answer. That technically would be our answer, but again, they are asking us to round. So we are going to have to round, and my final answer for this one would be 98.3. So again, if you have no idea how I got that, you move the decimal twice and you end up with 98. Okay, I'm so sorry. That's an 8. 0.34. And remember, they're asking us to round to the nearest tenth. So remember, place value says that this is your tenths place. You chop it off here, and then you look to the number on the right. If this number here would have been a 5 or larger, it would have made the 3 go up 1 value, but it didn't. So it just stays at 98.3. Okay, so that's all we're doing for these kinds of problems. It's pretty simple. Okay, for letter B, I think. Again, same thing. You have a decimal, make it to a percent. You move this twice. You fill it up here. And that's it, right? That is actually just 4%. We don't end up with a decimal, so there's no need to round. So again, just remember, you move it twice, add a percent sign. Some of you, if you're gonna think you're gonna have problems remembering to what side to move the decimal, you could just bust out your calculator, multiply 0.04 times 100. You're gonna get the same answer. All right, next one here. Make the decimal into a percent. Move the decimal 2 times. As weird as that looks, that's okay. It's gonna be 234.787. But again, we do have to round because the instructions say to the nearest tenth. So this is my tenths place value. Chop it off there. Look at this number. Who cares about the 7? Look at that number. Since that number is greater than 5, it's going to make that 7 go up 1. So my final answer is 234.8%. Okay, so be careful with the rounding there. All right, last one here. Just like the ones we've been doing before, move it twice to the right and then add the percent sign. So hopefully we all agree there. The final answer would just be 73%. Okay, so this is how you convert a decimal to a percent. All right, now we're gonna go the other way around. And this is where I start losing people, right? So if I ask you to convert a percent to a decimal, it's gonna be exactly the opposite of what we did in the last problems. Right? Instead of moving the decimal twice to the right, you're going to move it twice to the left. And instead of adding the percent sign, you're going to remove it. So again, converting a percent to a decimal, you move twice to the left and you remove the percent sign. Again, if you are going to forget this, it's the opposite of what we did on the last slide. In the last slide, to make a percent to a decimal, you multiplied by 100. So now to make the percent into a decimal, we're going to divide by 100. Right? So again, let me say that again. Decimal to percent, multiply by 100. Percent to decimal, divide by 100. Again, it's the same thing as moving the decimal point twice to the left. So here they're asking us write the decimal, write as a decimal and to the nearest thousand. So here we're going to practice another place value. So again, this is a percent. We're going to drop the percent sign. We're going to move the decimal twice to the left. So my answer is going to be 0.382. And then we have to make sure we round according to the instructions. So it says to the nearest thousand. So remember, this is your tenths, your hundredths, and your thousands. There is nothing after the 2, so there's no rounding needed for this one. My final answer is just 0.382. Again, the decimal is here. We do like to put a number in the front. If there's no number, we put a 0. Okay, so it's pretty simple. That's all we're doing. All right, for the next one, same thing, right? Drop the percent sign. We move our decimal twice to the left. Yes, something like that. There you go. That is terrible, but you get it. Twice to the left, so we end up with 0.4281. Again, to the nearest thousand, so we have tenths, hundredths, thousands. So we are going to have to chop it off right here. Again, how do you know if the 8 is going to stay as an 8 or go up 1? You look at the number right next to it. Since it's a 1, it's not 5 or greater, the 8 is going to stay the way it is, and we get rid of this number. So my final answer is 0.428. Pretty simple. All right, moving on, because they're very easy. Oh my goodness, look at the next one. When you do not have a decimal point, you're always going to assume it's right here next to the percent sign at the very end of the numbers. So first things first, don't panic, right? Oh my goodness, it doesn't have a decimal point. Add a decimal point and then just move it. So again, make this into a decimal. We're going to move it twice. And we don't have a thousands place in this case. So we just add a little 0 there. But to be honest, you don't need it. I just put it to denote the thousands place, right? You have your tenths, your hundreds, and then I put a thousands just so it could be there. Again, if for some reason you don't put that 0 there, that's okay. Don't worry about it. It will be the same thing. All right, so there we go. That's our answer for that one. Okay, next one here. we have to, again, we have a percent sign. We're trying to write it as a decimal. Get rid of the percent sign. Move your decimal twice to the left, but oh my goodness, what happens now, right? There's no number there. Just like I told you on the last slide, when you don't have a number, you just compensate that empty space with a 0. So my decimal is going to end up right here, and this empty space, I'm going to put a little 0 in there. Okay, so my answer should be 0.0, 2, 3, 4, 5. But again, that is our answer. But again, we do have to follow the instructions. Round to the nearest thousands. So we have the tens, hundreds, thousands. So we're going to chop it off here. And again, we have to look at this number. That number is a 5. So it's going to make the number next to it jump one space up. So my final answer would be, actually, I lied to you. Let's look at that again. Look at me. Oh my goodness. Okay, I totally made this on purpose. I messed it up on purpose just to see if you're paying attention, right? So actually, I messed this up right here. This is your tens space. So tens, hundreds, thousands. So look at that. We were supposed to chop it off here. Sorry about that. So we chop it off here. And then who cares about the 5? We look at the 4. The 4 is too small, so it doesn't do anything to the 3. So our final answer was just supposed to be that. Okay, so sorry about that. 0.023 would be our final answer. All right, last one here on this slide. Again, there's no decimal. What happens when we don't have a decimal? You just add it here to the very end. And then we move it twice. And then our answer would be 2.94. Again, I put a 0, but that's okay. You don't need it. I just put it in there so we would have a thousands place. But you wouldn't need it there. So my answer would just be 2.94. If you put the 0, we're not going to count it wrong. It's technically the same answer. Okay, so pretty much we already finished these problems here. You already know how to convert from a percent to a decimal and from a decimal to a percent, back and forth. So it's just a case of remembering where to move the decimal to what side, right? It's always going to be 2 spaces, but is it to the left or to the right? So just make sure you remember that. All right, the next thing we are going to be covering here is what if we start with a fraction? If you start with a fraction, you can make it into a decimal, and then that decimal you can actually make it into a percent. So depending on what the question's asking you, you will know where to stop. So if we have a fraction, first thing you want to do is make it into a decimal. To make it into a decimal, you are going to divide the numerator, which is a number on the top, by the denominator, which is the number on the bottom. So you would simply either do it manually or just take out your calculator and figure out what is the numerator divided by the denominator. If the question's asking for a decimal, that's it. You're done. Whatever you get is your answer. But if the question is asking you for a percent, then the decimal you get in step 1, you are going to have to convert into a percent. So you're going to convert the decimal that you find into a percent, which you guys are experts on by now. So let's go ahead and try this problem, right? In this problem, we have a scenario. We have 40 students in a class. And then on a certain day, 37 attended. So what percent was present? They're asking us to find a percent. So the first thing we're going to have to do is actually come up with a fraction, which shouldn't be that complicated. So in a fraction, remember the numerator is going to be the number that they give us. The denominator is going to be the total that they also give us, right? So we have 37 students out of the 40. So that's my fraction. Now, go ahead and take out your calculator or your phone calculator, whatever you have handy. You would divide that number to get your decimal. So what you would put in your calculator, you would put the numerator, which is 37, and then you would press divided by 40. And that is how you get your decimal. Right? So hopefully everybody agrees to that as an answer. So 37 divided by 40 gives us 0.925. Again, that would be our answer if they were asking us for a decimal, but they're asking us for a percent. And again, don't panic. We are experts on doing that. When they ask us to a percent, we know that we just move this little decimal twice to the right, and we add a percent sign. So we get our final answer of 92.5%. So that means that if we have a class of 40 students and 37 are present, that means that 92.5% of the class is there. So that's all you have to do. All right, let's go ahead and try one more just to make sure we got this. The fraction 13 over 25 is equivalent to what percent? So again, just like the last one, we are going to have to find the percent. So you start with your fraction. Again, put this in your calculator. So go ahead and give it a try. And you should get, so you would put 13 divided by 25. Make sure you do it like that. If you put 25 divided by 13, you are going to get the incorrect answer. So you do that, and we get 0.52. Again, that is not your final answer. They're asking us for a percent. So from here, grab the decimal, move it twice to the right, and add a percent sign, and boom, that's it. So 13 over 25 is equivalent to 52%. Pretty simple and straightforward. All right, to go ahead and just practice more. So you remember the procedure of changing a decimal number to 8%. So here we have a table, and we are going to have to practice going back and forth so we don't forget. So here we have a decimal number, and we're going to have to make it to a percent. So how do I make a decimal number into 8%? Okay, remember, when you have a decimal to percent, we have to multiply by 100. Okay, again, some of you are like, oh my goodness, what does she mean, right? Multiply by 100 is the same thing as moving the decimal 2 times to the right. So we don't have a decimal, I add a decimal, move it twice, and my answer ends up being 5,000%, right? So again, it's a huge number, but that's okay. That's why we put it, just so you get used to the fact of remembering when and how to move the decimal to what side. So when you have a decimal to a percent, you can multiply by 100 or just move the decimal twice, whatever you prefer. Now on the second one, it's backwards. So how do I go from a percent to a decimal? You do the opposite. You divide by 100. That is 100, okay, as ugly as it looks. Or you could just move the decimal twice instead of the right to the left. Right, so here again, we have no decimal. You put the decimal at the end. We move it twice to the right, and you drop the percent sign, right? Because we're talking about decimals. So the percent for this one is 432. Sorry, the decimal for this one is 432. All right, so hopefully you already got the gist of it. Now, here I'm not going to write it anymore, but you should know decimal to percent, multiply it times 100 or move it to the right. So my answer is going to be 300%. See how easy it is once you get the idea. Here we have one of these again, decimal to percent. So again, multiply times 100 or move it to the right. So I move it twice to the right and I get 12%. Okay, last one here. This one's backwards. How do I go from a percent to a decimal? Divide by 100 or move it to the left. So I have a little decimal here, move it to the left, drop the percent sign, and I just end up with 1.00, which is technically just 1. All right, so I did the last 3 pretty fast, but the notes are on the top part. So remember, when you go from decimal to a percent, you are going to multiply times 100 or move it to the right. So decimal to percent, multiply or move it to the right. When you have a percent becoming a decimal, you divide by 100 or move to the left. So that's all you have to do is remember when to move to the left, when to move to the right. All right, here we go to the last problems here, right? When you have a fraction, hopefully you remember, to make a fraction into a decimal. Hopefully you remember, you're shouting it out from your computer, right? Oh, we have to put in the calculator. Perfect. So when you put a fraction into a decimal, you are going to have to divide. So I'm just going to put a little division sign. Again, put this in the calculator. 1 divided by 2. Hopefully everybody knows that that's 0.5. And then again, make this into a percent. How do you make this into a percent? Well, you multiply by 100 Or some of you are going to prefer to move the decimal twice to the right. That's okay, whatever you prefer. So if I move this twice to the right, I get 50%. Okay, so that's all we do. And again, just for practice, let's go ahead and do the other two. If you put 7 divided by 20 in your calculator, you should get 0.35. And then you should be just like that and know, okay, this is going to be 35%. Right, again, what we did was just move this twice. All right, the last one here, 13 divided by 250, put that in your calculator. And you should get 0.052. And to make that into a percent, move it twice, add a percent sign, and the answer for this one is simply 5.2%. Okay, so that was just little problems on how to deal with fractions.